Welcome to lesson 3. So far, you've been working on restoring your posture and stacking your alignment, plus resetting your breathing system. And now it's time to layer in your pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor is a big piece of this entire puzzle that helps your abdominals get stronger. So lesson 3, strong abs start from the pelvic floor. And if your abs feel weak, the missing piece may just be your pelvic floor. So I'm going to go ahead and break that down. But let's start with, what is the pelvic floor? Your pelvic floor is an internal support system that holds your organs in place. So your pelvic floor is a group of muscles at the bottom of your pelvis. Think about it like a hammock sling. And these deeper muscles, where you see the black arrows, they help hold your organs in place. And most importantly, they make sure that the organs don't fall out of our body. But there are also other more superficial muscles that help control the openings, for example, for our urethra and our vagina and the anus. So there are more muscles, but these ones, the deeper ones, they help support our organs. But what also lives in the same neighborhood is your deep hip rotator muscles, which are the ones that you see in the green arrows. So we've got two specific muscles here. We've got the piriformis and the obturator internus right here. And the biggest takeaway from this is that if your hips and glutes are weak, guess what? That's going to affect your pelvic floor muscles. So we have to train the whole body. So your pelvic floor is not separate from your core. It's a part of it. Everything works together. Your pelvic floor has two types of strength, meaning it has two different types of fibers. So you've got the slow twitch muscle fibers in your pelvic floor, and they help hold and support all day long. So these are your endurance muscles, and there's 70% of them in our pelvic floor. So activities such as walking, carrying kids, and even standing, that's when those muscles are working. Again, most of the time, you've got the endurance muscles kicking in. And then we also have the fast twitch fibers, and they react quickly when you cough, sneeze, or you jump. And basically, we need to make sure that our pelvic floor can work in both ways. It can support and it can bring in that endurance, hold us in many ways during the whole day. And it can also kick in quickly when we step off a curb or we cough, and make sure that we don't pee on ourselves or our organs don't fall out. That's important. So how the pelvic floor moves with breathing. Your breath drives the system. You already know when you take an inhale, the diaphragm contracts and pulls down. When that happens, your pelvic floor relaxes. So it relaxes to basically think about like catch the pressure that's coming from the top. So it's going to give a little bit more room. Okay. And on the exhale, your diaphragm goes up and your pelvic floor goes up. It contracts, it lifts up, or it just recoils up to its starting position. So inhale, pelvic floor relaxes. Exhale, pelvic floor lifts and recoils up. This is a natural rhythm, and we restore it. We don't force it. We make sure the pelvic floor is doing its job like it's supposed to be doing. How pelvic floor connects to your abs. So they manage pressure together. Your deep abs and pelvic floor coordinate to manage pressure. If the pressure pushes down without control from the abs, symptoms can happen such as leaking, prolapse, hernias, and all sorts of instability. But when your abs and the pelvic floor coordinate well, this strength feels stable and supportive. So again, your abs have to help from the top, and they support the pelvic floor. And the abs help protect the pelvic floor by controlling pressure from above. So important connection. Your hips influence your pelvic floor, just like the picture you saw. you see the hip muscles living in the same neighborhood. These deep hip rotator and pelvic floor muscles share connective tissue. If your hips or glutes are weak or tight is weak also, your pelvic floor compensates. And when your pelvic floor compensates, your abs cannot do their job. So do you see this domino effect? Now, this is why we train hips, glutes, core all together, plus upper body. It all matters. Tight versus lengthened pelvic floor. Okay, a lot of the times moms think that their pelvic floor is just weak or overstretched, but you can also have very tight pelvic floor muscles, and neither of them are strong. So think about tight pelvic floor. For example, if you're clenching like this all day long, all the time, and the muscle never gets to lengthen and contract like it naturally should, because if it naturally can do the job both ways, then it's healthy and then it's strong. But if it's only like this, then it starts to break down. So tight is also weak. And overstretched and over lengthened is also weak. So we want to create a really good balance because the muscle needs to contract and it needs to lengthen. My movement was opposite, but you know what I mean. So the lengthened pattern or under supportive, overstretch, it may feel like heaviness or pressure in the pelvic floor, leaking, difficulty maintaining support. And also, think about like a tampon falling out. If you put a tampon in and it's always falling out, then potentially you could have a very weak pelvic floor and it needs to get re-strengthened. So common contributors would be too much pressure pushing down over time. This could be in pregnancy. This could be how you were training or overdoing it too much in training, or a really difficult birth where you were pushing for many, many hours and the muscles got overstretched. But on top of that, you never rebuild the muscles after birth. Breathing and pressure patterns that push downward, like holding breath also, bearing down. Think about even when you go into the bathroom, number 1 or number 2, if you're bearing down all the time, it's also going to weaken those muscles. Along with constant bracing, I put having hip and glutes weak. That's also going to affect pelvic floor and also weaken the pelvic floor. Now, on the opposite end, tight pattern or overworking. So your pelvic floor is constantly here. It may feel like constant tension or gripping there, difficulty to fully relax, especially on the inhale. So if you cannot relax and feel that pelvic floor kind of push out a little bit on an inhale, you might need to do something called a reverse Kegel. And that is the opposite of an actual Kegel. So again, you need to be able to relax the pelvic floor so you can optimally then contract. But let me back up. You might also have pain with intimacy or even inserting tampons or having a vaginal exam. Now, common contributors here could be chronic guarding, maybe because of stress, maybe because of anxiety, constipation, trauma, or even trauma with birth, having scar tissue in that area, or any kind of pain. So that can create that guarding and that tightness, right? Constant bracing in the abs or poor ability to lengthen like the diaphragm. You have poor ability, have your ribs expand and how your diaphragm moves. And compensation for instability. Again, you're compensating, gripping also gripping the glutes. So the glutes might be weak and we need to restore them and make them strong and healthy. So you're not gripping that entire system. And therefore now your pelvic floor over tightens because you're like, I can't support. I'm going to have to grip my buns and my pelvic floor all together. So again, hot mess. Either way, lengthened pelvic floor versus tight pelvic floor, they both are weak. So we need to create that balance. And Tight doesn't mean strong, and overstretched does not mean broken. Both need the coordination and both need the support and balance, and that's what we will be building. What is a Kegel? Kegel is a coordinated pelvic floor contraction. So you need to be able to first gently close the vaginal opening, or think about stopping the flow of urine, and then lift it up. This is on the exhale towards the belly button. So close and then lift, and then fully relaxed. So on the inhale, the pelvic floor relaxes. On the exhale, you need to be able to close and lift that pelvic floor. Keep lifting like it's taking an elevator to the penthouse. Inhale, relax. Breathe in, everything relaxes. Exhale, close and lift. There's no glute squeezing, okay? The glutes are not doing this. We're not trying to compensate, use other muscles. And the abs are also not over gripping. This is an internal contraction. You should be able to do this without, again, the glutes stepping in, without the abs gripping, or without holding your breath. And for somebody who has very tight pelvic floor, first of all, you can have that checked out. You go to a pelvic floor PT. If you're not sure, if you're worried about it, get in there, have them look at it, have it examine it. And you can do something like a reverse Kegel, meaning instead of contracting your pelvic floor on the exhale, you're going to be learning how to relax it. You're going to rework that system and only later on layer the contraction. Once we know that pelvic floor is relaxed. That's a little side tip. But here, just know naturally the job of our pelvic floor. Inhale, relax. Exhale, close and lift. Boom. First, we learn how to engage and fully relax the pelvic floor, and then we build strength. So how we train the pelvic floor. The connection comes first. Right now, our job is to make sure, is our pelvic floor working the way it's supposed to be working? This is the natural pattern that I just described. And then we're going to coordinate it with the posture, how we stack, how we're breathing, and how our abdominals sync up with the pelvic floor. And then, of course, we're going to progress into full body strength training, which you will see as we get into phase 2 of training. We don't isolate the pelvic floor only right now, and we train it as part of the whole system. So your abs work best when the pelvic floor supports. This is the time to make sure your pelvic floor is doing the right job, because when we get into your workouts, it needs to fire automatically. And we're going to continue to focus on building really deep strength in our abs.